Tensions continue to rise between the Trump administration and Iran. To tell us more about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, U.S. intel is now warning of potential Iranian attacks in the Persian Gulf.
This is an extremely sensitive and heightened situation. And what the U.S. is warning today in briefings across Washington is that we are watching out for any miscalculations. That's the word that's being thrown out the most, meaning that any small misunderstanding, miscalculation, provocation, or action could be seen as an act of war, could be retaliated against, etc. Now, with the case of Iran, they have stacked across the region tentacles, mercenaries, proxy fighters, whatever you want to call them. And that's the fear that, we had a near attack near the embassy in Iraq, for example, over the weekend. Something like that could happen. Are there proxy fighters going to go after American assets in the region, wherever that may be? All over the Middle East, even in South America, they have proxy fighters, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So that is the fear right now, and that is what the U.S. is watching for very carefully today.
Iranian production of enriched uranium has quadrupled. Iran says it's poised to exceed limits on its nuclear stockpile. Should we be worried about something like this?
Well, it's interesting because we had an Iran nuclear deal with the Iranian regime, and that wasn't curbing their behavior. So, of course, now that the deal has been torn up for over a year, just over a year, of course, the Iranians, the first thing that they can fight back with is, well, we're going to continue marching on with our nuclear program and the enrichment of uranium, of course. That being the Achilles heel of the international community in trying to curb Iran and its nuclear program. Is there a big difference between what we were watching before and watching now? Not really. The only difference is that we're watching for Iran's actions with regards to, again, going after U.S. assets, going after Israel, going after any of our assets in the region, or showing us that if they are enriching uranium or going after their weapons program, what will they do with it? What's interesting is that what intel we have today points to the fact that whatever we're doing militarily to kind of scare off the Iranian regime has been working, and that they've been curbing their behavior or their actions, I should say, in the region with regards to their presence in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Persian Gulf, etc. So I think what's more important is to watch their actions and not their words, because there's always been this big huffing and puffing coming from the Iranian regime for over 40 years. This is their go-to. That's that chest thumping and saber rattling to show their adversaries that they are strong and they will do whatever it takes to stay in power. It's another page from the North Korean handbook, and now you can add perhaps China and Venezuela to that list as well. So this is the dictator's way of behaving. And so I don't know if the words should scare us more than what we should look at their actions.
Iran is hitting back at the Trump administration, saying Trump needs to try respect instead of threats. Zarif gave Trump a history lesson, saying his country will survive the U.S. like they survived Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan.
Yes, these are interesting words. They should demand respect, right? Dictators demanding respect. Well, how about you earn some respect and stop killing innocent people around the world, including Americans, Canadians, Europeans, with the sponsorship of terror, with supporting terror groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, killing U.S. assets in Iraq and Afghanistan, across the map. These are the plays that Iran has made that will not give them the respect that they're demanding right now. And what's interesting is that they're calling upon the rich Iranian history that which they deny inside the country. Because, as you know, 40 years ago, this theocracy, which is a religious Islamic government, overthrew the Shah of Iran, who was a king, who was a monarch, who did take pride in the history and the culture of of Iran, or the Persian Empire. So what's interesting is inside the country, and this is very more nuanced point. These mullahs, they almost kind of want to erase this culture of Iran, and they want to rewrite it with an Islamic empire. They want to undo what was the Persian Empire. And here we are on the world stage. They're touting that Persian Empire that was able to defeat all these adversaries in all these historic wars. So it's an interesting point that they're making.
The president of Iraq is now saying he doesn't want his country to become a battleground for the U.S.-Iran fight. Tell me more about that.
Right. And again, watching these proxy fighters and watching what Iran has done in terms of lining up its proxy fighters in Iraq and hovering over that a very, very vulnerable political situation in Iraq. And here they are. They have the presence there. And there we are, U.S. having assets on the ground there. So, of course, the Iraqis finally getting a little bit of a semblance of normalcy, if I can use that word, and all of a sudden now they have the threat of course, Iran not wanting to fight this war on its own grounds, and the U.S., of course, not wanting that war to come over here. So Iraq is obviously worried that this will trickle over into their country.
A trade deal between the world's two biggest economies has not yet been struck. Beijing says U.S. has some pretty high expectations for a trade deal. Will we see a deal get struck between the U.S. and China?
You know, when the one side is saying you have high expectations, it doesn't look like a great sign of things to come. We'd like to believe that the tariffs have driven the Chinese economy to a place where they will want to strike a deal with the U.S. in order to free themselves. I've heard many accounts of factories being shut down and banks being in a very, very red zone in terms of the economy really tanking and the tariffs taking a toll on them. It's taking a toll on companies here in the United States as well, all over the world, because as you said, these are two powerhouses. And when there are tariffs on these common goods and brand names that people rely on, we're all going to face the consequences of those price hikes. Now, again, with China kind of playing this cat and mouse and Donald Trump standing firm and saying, we're not going to negotiate unless we get X, Y, and Z, and being very firm on the standards of that deal. Again, before President Trump was even candidate Trump, when he was just an entrepreneur in New York City, he would always talk about the fact that the Chinese take advantage of the status quo and what the U.S. and the West in general has allowed for China to do with regards not only to not paying their share in trade, but more so in stealing intellectual property and patents, etc. And until they stop this bullying behavior, the message from the U.S., from the White House, is that you can't play with us unless you're going to play by the rules. So we'll see where that takes us.
And what's interesting, too, a trade war song with anti-U.S. lyrics has actually gone viral in China.
You have to see the words to the song, Hal, and it's funny that it's gone viral, but it's almost like a cheerleader's cheer. It's like, they can't get us, I don't know the exact words, but to that, the gist of, we're going to win this trade war, they can't get us. It's government propaganda, but the fact that it's gone viral, the fact that they're using social media, pop culture, music, etc., to kind of get this to get people to rally around the flag and not give up on their government at the negotiating table. I mean, it's very easy once the economy tanks to blame the government and to turn on the government and to fill the streets. Because again, you have people in China who used to ride their bikes to work that are now driving Ferraris to work. And all of a sudden, when that economy tanks, they will think of the days when they have to go back to riding that bike to work. So it's very, very sensitive and very precarious. So the Chinese government is extremely intelligent in kind of trying to, rally up that patriotism and get people, again, to have that nationalistic belief in their government that they're going to win this trade war, as the song says.
Now, another war is actually brewing with Chinese tech company Huawei. And Lisa, Top U.S. tech companies have begun to cut off vital Huawei supplies.
Yes, this is an interesting um, interaction between the US and Huawei because it's really over the 5G war. We don't want them to kind of have monopoly over this, and also because of what's going on with China, this is perfectly timed. Now, today it was announced that Donald Trump was giving a little bit of leniency towards Huawei, and we saw a rise in some very vital stocks. So it's very, very sensitive. Trade is, and the stock market here in this country is extremely vigilant about what's going on in China, what's going on with Huawei, what this relationship means. Every conversation is driving the up and down of the stock market. And because of that, we need to see a resolution to this very, very quickly. And Huawei is a part of that. I know Canada is also watching this very, very carefully as well. This will affect all of us. I was glad to see some of the tariff relief for Mexico and Canada this week by the U.S. And hopefully we will go forward as a unit again, the West, defeating or winning this trade war against the East.
Now, the big tariff wars we've been discussing between the U.S. and China has not been good for many big businesses. Nike and Adidas both call the tariffs catastrophic in an open letter to U.S. President Donald Trump, and Walmart is now saying it'll raise prices because of the tariffs.
Right. This is one of those things. In the short term, it's awful. It's just awful. And it's going to maybe get worse before it gets any better. Look, this is something that Donald Trump has promised corporations and the sectors that are truly affected. I mean, these corporations aren't even seeing a fraction of what farmers are experiencing in the middle of our country here. No one ever talks about the middle of America. We talk about the coasts and the cities and what they're experiencing and the stock market in New York and all of that, Hollywood. But really, the middle of this country, whether they're devastated by floods in some parts and in other parts devastated by these tariffs that are really taking a toll on the farming industry, they're suffering. And the bottom line and the message here is that they will suffer in the short term, and there will be this growing pain before we see any resolution. Many people, many analysts are talking about 2020, the election, the presidential election that we will have here, which will be a hopeful, what Donald Trump hopes will be a re-election for him, will be very much or partially contingent upon whether or not we can solve this trade issue. This will dictate a lot of our economy, the stock market, the prices at the gas station, a lot of the trade, a lot of the vital companies that you just mentioned that provide basic goods, places like Walmart and Target, et cetera, all of course suffering because of those basic goods that are brought in from China. And they know exactly where to place those tariffs on basic goods like televisions and bacon and alcohol, and the list goes on and on. So again, down the line, people are being affected by this, and just puts more pressure on the White House and on China to get a deal sooner rather than later.
Now, speaking of suffering, let's talk about what's been happening in Venezuela. And a Venezuela opposition envoy met with officials from the Pentagon and the State Department on Monday, trying to find a solution to the standoff between President Maduro and opposition leader Guaido. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is an interesting relationship between the U.S. and the Venezuelan opposition, because we here in the U.S., from a foreign policy standpoint, are not taking the full interventionalist approach, but yet very much involved, meaning the U.S. has put full support behind Guaido. He is a U.S. Educated individual. Many believe that he's a U.S. puppet even, meaning that he was propped up by the U.S. government. That might be a conspiracy theory. There might be some truth to his at least relationship with the White House. And here you have more members of the opposition meeting with U.S. officials, meaning that there is a connection. There is some sort of guidance or advisory going on between the two countries. And again, U.S. being very vocal about Maduro needing to leave Venezuela. But again, on the ground, the story is very, very different. The hunger, the humanitarian crisis continues. The opposition has taken a step back because, as we've seen in many countries, what happens is that people cannot be protesting and on the streets for days. These things fizzle out. And when they fizzle out, what's the phase two? What is the next plan of action? And what will these countries do what will, I'm sorry, the opposition do in order to move forward? And I think that that's really the key here. And you look at all the countries that have had successful revolutions. There have been different phases of that revolution. The first part being to remove the dictator, which is, in this case, not so easy. But the second phase always comes into now replacing it with a viable government, which we have with a lot of international support. But how are we going to make that transition is the question.
Lisa, Palestinians have rejected the U.S. Economic Peace Summit in Bahrain, say they will not attend. Hamas apparently opposes Trump's Bahrain workshop meant to incentivize Palestinians.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. The White House, under the direction of Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of the president, who is working very, very diligently on releasing a Middle East plan. This is a plan to have peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. He has announced that he will release that plan at the end of Ramadan. So we're looking about maybe 25 days from now. And in conjunction with this, Bahrain has agreed to host an economic summit. So this peace plan is not an economic plan, but what this economic summit hopes to do is to show the Palestinians and the Israelis, more so the Palestinians, that if you compromise, if you work together, these are the incentives that follow. And Bahrain is, a regional player in all of this. And what's interesting is to look at the regional players, the moderate Arab countries who want to see the peace plan go through, but yet the peace plan hasn't even been released yet, and you have the Palestinians saying, no, we don't want it. So this should be interesting. It's not fun to have a negotiation when the one side says, we don't even want you to exist. So why is there even a conversation that follows that? It should be interesting because from what I hear, and I'm working also closely with the team that's releasing the peace plan, so hopefully I'll have more and more information about this as time goes on. But from what I know, it's extremely nuanced. It's extremely, it calls on both sides to compromise, and it takes out the previous vocabulary or jargon that causes that sensitive or that triggering on both sides, like two-state solution. And that's done on purpose so that both sides can come with a clean palette and say, if we really want to make this happen, this is how we're going to do it. Now, again, when you have the Palestinians not even wanting to hear about the plan, not even wanting to attend this summit, we're hoping for a better leadership for them. I think the Palestinian people have finally come to a point where they're blaming their own leadership more so than they're blaming the Israelis for their predicament. So they deserve better, and they deserve better leadership, and that's the only way they will get to a better future.
Yeah, praying for peace in the Middle East once and for all. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.